So yesterday we talked a lot about just emotional awareness and putting ourselves in a place where we truly are allowing ourselves to feel all emotions, that an emotion isn't good or bad. It's just is. It's an emotion and we can learn from it. So I'd love to hear, I know I gave you guys a couple of things to think about yesterday, some action plans and things to do. I'd love to hear, when you considered, for instance, are there emotions that you feel like are bad and that you maybe block a lot? And what's that impact right now on your life? And are there some emotions that you needed to get out? Maybe things like anger or sadness or those kinds of things that you might need to get out of your system so that you can heal. Okay. So let me know how that went. We're going to move forward pretty good today because I want to make sure that I get to the forgiveness part of it. And so you can really see, what does that look like for you? Again, as I talked about yesterday, forgiveness doesn't have to mean that you've completely, whatever thing has happened to you. It can still be something you can authentically say, that was horrible, that sucked. But for your own good, there are ways to be able to work through it so that you're not carrying it so much. So it's not a wound that can turn into other things. Now, as I get into it, in about an hour today, I'm going to be doing my 1 minute healing, which is a free 1 hour where I translate the message behind the pain and disease of as many people as I can in that hour. I cannot guarantee that I can get to everyone. I try my best, but I know I've got about, 35 people that are already signed up as of yesterday. So I think I've got a couple more spots open. So if it's something that you're interested in taking a look at or getting on and letting me know that, if you have something going on, that I can try to help you with it, that is 1minutehealing.com. Let me see, I'll put that in the chat just so you guys can have it. So it's just all one together. I think I limited it. So if for some reason it says that you can't get in, then you'll get information about the next one, which is in 2 weeks. Okay, let's get going, you guys. So this, as you probably could tell yesterday, this particular station is one I really, really, really like talking about, because when we do bring our awareness to emotion, we bring power to literally every aspect of our lives. So even if 4 didn't show up in your numbers right now, regardless of any of that, this is something, if you work on it, it's just going to make such a huge, huge difference for you. So we talked about this yesterday. In fact, there's my quote: when awareness is brought to an emotion, power is brought to your life. That's probably my most shared quote, actually. To my shock, I'll have people who send it to me all the time, like, oh, look, somebody quoted you in this article. I'm like, oh, cool. Okay, so here, this is sort of an extension on what I talked to you about yesterday. If you want to take a look at this, it's 3:15, and you can kind of look at these list of emotions, and you could really, do view one as, good or bad. Now, again, is it more enjoyable and more fun to experience joy over fear or hope over guilt? Yes, not saying that's not a better experience. But when viewed from a place of, for instance, fear, I actually just read this great article. Matt, what the heck is that guy's name? It's just escaped he's the one that he was in the Lincoln Lawyer. Anyways, he was going on the Jay Leno show, and he was super, super nervous. He had not been on before, and this was like a big thing. And he was and Jay Leno apparently walked in, and he was afraid. He said he felt like he almost wanted to zip out of there. Yeah, McConaughey. Thank you, Rachel. You keep me keep me moving here. Matt McConaughey. Thank you. Okay. And he seems like a very sweet person in general, but he was very, 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 very nervous. So fearful about going on. And apparently Jay Leno said, you want me to teach you something that these 5 words are gonna make sure that no matter, even if you feel fear, you can get through something. And he's like, well, sure. And he said, all you have to say to yourself is, I want to be here. And I was like, that to me, you never think about it. But when we get really anxious, we get really nervous about something, especially if you're having to take some big steps to up-level your life. That can be so scary because you are stepping outside of your comfort zone. So, the first thing to greet you usually is fear when you start to do that, right? And then to remind yourself, I want to be here. I want to be doing this. I may be feeling this fear. See, that's a good one where you can just be like, okay, well, all right, this is not an emotion I really want to feel, but it's teaching me something, and I can choose to learn that lesson and move forward. Okay. So these are really great questions. And I love this one because keeping this kind of a list for yourself is super helpful. List some ways you can positively express quote unquote bad emotions. So we talked yesterday about how you can express anger in positive ways. You can express sadness in positive ways. You don't have to turn it towards other people. You don't have to get passive aggressive. You don't have to do all those sort of like negative expressions. You can find ways to get it out of your system, and then you can start to learn the lesson and move forward. Okay. So here we're going to move into, sometimes as we move into actually taking a look at where emotions might be clogging up our system, we can get to a point where it's almost, we don't want to re-experience the pain of that. And I have been there, done that, where I had something in my past that I knew I needed. It was just noisier than I wanted it to be, right? It was like a memory hologram that just had a lot of attachment around. There was a lot of emotional attachment around it that was not necessarily positive, and it was causing problems in my life. And I knew that there was trauma involved. There was just trauma involved in that one. And so I reached out to somebody to do EMDR, which is very effective. And in like 1 or 2 sessions, you can usually it just helps you to turn down the volume if there's something like that. So everything I'm teaching you here absolutely works for, retuning and changing and shifting a lot of these old things. There can be things that if there is like something that was really shocking or scary or traumatic to you, it can stick in there a little better. And EMDR, you move your eyes back and forth as you're desensitizing. However, one of the things I realized when I met with the lady that I was going to work with is she's like, okay, well, talk me through. The next thing I knew, I was like talking her through kind of, you start with the core memory, and she's like, well, tell me about that. And all of a sudden I'm like fritzed out because now every little thing that I had attached to that particular thing is now coming up, right? And so it can be similar, and it's really overwhelming. Like, it's really overwhelming. That can be the moment where you're just like, you know what? Forget it. I'm boxing all that back up, and I'm good. I'm good. We're not looking at that anymore, right? And so you may feel this way. You may have this happen, okay? And it can be very, very, very difficult, especially if you're a person who did go through some difficult things in your life. We all have, and that you've boxed them up or you've blocked them. Okay, so when you work through those things, sometimes the waves of those emotions can come back, and you're afraid they're going to sort of knock you over and you're not going to be able to handle it. And I can promise you, you can handle it. Moving through it, as I've just talked about, in ways that you can actually express those things and get them out of your system, will help you so helpful, okay? And the problem is, like, when we don't let those kinds of emotions go, when we're afraid of unboxing them, they can create an obstacle to living joyfully, to living with hope, to living with being able to take steps forward that are for your best, confidently. Okay, so they basically turn the volume down on your life and what you can achieve and how you can feel. Okay. So as I say, it may not be very enjoyable sometimes, and just be prepared. A lot of times there can be a healing crisis to go through here as you're unboxing some of these things. And it can feel like, why am I doing this to myself? I promise you, if you use this process and you get through it to the other side, it's like the gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Okay. It's like there was a lot of storms, and now here's the rainbow and the gold. Okay. So one thing that can help you a lot is to imagine that anytime you're releasing, you've got like this blockage of an emotion that's stuck. Let's say it's anger, let's say it's grief, and you don't want to re-experience it, but you kind of need to move through it, and you need to maybe use these process. And so you express it, express it in positive ways. And then one thing that helps me a lot is to imagine, just like we talked about in the particles, that energy can be neither created nor destroyed. And we can imagine that energy, even negative energy like a tumor, which nobody thinks of as good, reasonably enough, when it goes away, that energy can be released, and it's neither good nor bad. It can come back as something great. In the same way, you can imagine that when you are releasing this sadness or this grief, that you're releasing it and it's going out into the universe to come back to you in positive ways. And that's something that is super helpful. Now, all of that said, if you are dealing with station 4, if you are dealing with having to uncover and release some really difficult emotions and you are feeling overwhelmed by it, that's where you post in the group and let us know so that I can also help you. Okay. Oh, I like that. Okay. Joan said, I learned to hide or ignore emotions that didn't feel good. Well-meaning adults just wanted to skip to the end where I just feel better or good. Oh, sure. That's a good one. So I didn't learn to process the emotions and they get stuck inside. It's difficult to let it go. 100%. And this, I think, there's this awesome parenting coach that I follow. It's Mr. Chaz, and I adore this man. So if anybody ever, I mean, even if you're not a parent, his emotional awareness, even for an adult, is really, really, really amazing. But Joan, to your exact point, he does sometimes like some reels and things about the fact that depending on somebody's parenting style, they can't handle if their child is sad, upset, angry, etc. And so they just come in and swarm, and then they're just like, they just need you to, they will do whatever they can just to, instead of allowing you to express it, it's like, no, can we just get to the point where you feel better? And so because of that, exactly what you're talking about. And so again, it can be very well-meaning parents. And it's something I have to keep myself aware of. I think a lot of times it can be empath parents because, you'll feel your child's pain as if it's your own. And you, of course, want them to feel better. You don't want to hurt them. You don't want them to be hurting, I should say. And so I've had to be very aware of being able to just sit and allow my daughter when she's upset to be like, all right, I can see you're upset. Let's you go ahead. Let's deal with this. Or I can see you're hurt. Let's talk it through. Tell me how you're feeling. Right? So that's such a good point, Joan. Thank you so much. That can come even from, it doesn't have to be abusive parents. It can be really great parents that are just trying to help. All right. So we talk about, again, I'm just going to go through these emotions quickly because I really want to get to the forgiveness part. But obviously, sadness is one that we've learned a lot of times to block. Empathic people oftentimes were taught that they were too sensitive, always crying about something. You're so dramatic. And so they can learn to just not show it. They can cry in their bed, which I did more than once, where they just are like, you aren't allowed the space necessarily to cry. And then you'll have men who are maybe kind and sensitive men. Sadness is supposed to be weak, right? Crying is an expression of weakness. In fact, I remember I was standing behind someone some years ago. Oprah had a thing where you could try out for your own talk show. So I went and did this, and it was in Atlanta, and I'm standing in line, and I was standing in line behind this woman, and I happened to look, and on the back of her arm, she had a tattoo that said, "Tears are just weakness leaving the body." And I was like, oh, all right. So that sounds like sort of a badge of honor in some way, but it's actually, it's not weak to cry, right? It's not weak to cry. It's about the fact that we have sadness. We acknowledge that sadness. We go through the process of, I am sad. Why am I sad? What about this is making me sad? What decisions do I need to make because I am sad and I want this to be better? And it may be a situation where, let's say you're in a relationship where the person makes you cry all the time and you're sad all the time. And why are you sad? You're sad because they're disrespectful. You're sad because this relationship isn't actually the unconditional love you want. You're sad because the person doesn't speak to you nicely. Well, all of those things can tell you, I don't want, this isn't right. I need out. I'm out of this. This is not right. Okay. That's where when we bring our awareness to this. So again, we don't want to repress. Grief is a big one, you guys. Grief is a big one for people manifesting disease. It's particularly big when I'm dealing with people that have cancer. The tumors, oftentimes, even benign tumors, are usually wounds, emotional wounds of betrayal or emotional wounds of sadness that somebody didn't express. Or they can be wounds of grief that's unexpressed. So I encounter a lot of people where, because something happened in their life that was very, very difficult, the loss of a loved one particularly, that they had to hold it together for everybody else. And so they never allowed themselves to actually grieve the loss because they just had to keep moving. It will come out somewhere. And that's where I will see, women, I'll see a lot of times it could be breast cancer, where it's that grief, they either weren't allowed to express it. They didn't think, they thought they had to be strong. And it can show up a little differently for men. I've had men who've had mini strokes because of grief that they they basically, it was a shock. This particular situation was a shock to their system, and they just like shut it all in. So that's something that's very important. And I want you to also notice as we move through this and as you are transforming yourself, changing from who you've always known yourself to be to this new you that is in alignment with your dream life, sometimes we need to take some time and grieve the old self. Okay? Because if we don't, there are reasons, there are sometimes advantages to being who you are right now, right? If you, let's say you have a business and you want your business to expand, and yet if it expands, you know that might mean more working hours, and you don't necessarily want more working hours or more responsibility, right? And maybe responsibility is associated with something negative in your life, right? And so if we're not aware of that and we don't kind of acknowledge the fact that maybe there's sadness about us having to leave something that's very comfortable right now, even if it's not for our best, then we can get stuck there. And that's where we'll see like patterns that are not changing, okay? So that's, if you have a lot of if you feel like there's sadness and so forth stuck, 321 is a great one to do those exercises. Here's some great, if you block sadness and grief. Anger, we've talked about, okay? So we can turn anger against ourselves as well. You know, I'll be completely honest. I think I don't tend to turn anger externally very much. It's just not particularly my personality. But if I do anything, I find that this like self-critical anger will come at me where I never think I'm doing enough and so forth like that. I have to really pay attention to that. And you maybe, if you're a person who's like high achieving, or if you had parents that were like high standards and nothing else mattered, you can also get that very negative voice in your head where you're actually turning the anger against yourself. It's like you're beating yourself up, right? So these are things that if this is something, you know, if you end up turning around and being like, I'm such a mess up, I'm so mad at myself, I'm such a mess up, I'm so frustrated, like that kind of stuff towards yourself, I want you to really pay attention to where did that come from? Why are you, because we don't like come out into the world knowing how to direct anger to ourselves, right? Where does that come from? And so this one in particular can have a really nice tie to 3. So if you have a 3 and a 4 in your numbers, your flow factor, you may want to just take a quick gander here and see if that's true for you as well. And the thing is a lot of times like people that are, you know, oh, you're such a nice girl, you're so kind, like you can't be angry, right? I've had people that are like, well, you're an empath, you're not supposed to be angry. It's like, yeah, I'm allowed to get you're allowed to get angry. If somebody steps on your toes, if there's boundaries, if there's things in the world you think need to be changed, you're allowed to get angry. We're all allowed to get angry. And then we can find positive ways to take action, right? And as I say here, you cannot avoid anger. It will bubble to the surface one way or another. So even if you're accustomed to like holding in the anger because your family couldn't handle it, it will come out. So sometimes it'll come out as suddenly someone exploding, where you have this very nice person who's held it in so long, and like one little thing ends up being is it the straw that broke the camel's back? We're going to go with that one. And it's like that last little thing that suddenly they explode and everybody's like, wow, what's your problem? And it's like, oh my God, they've been holding this all in, dealing with all of you crazy people for so long. That's what their problem is, you know? So pay attention to that particular thing, okay? So if you have like anger seems to be a big issue for you, take a look at these exercises, page 324. Here's some really good ones. Excuse me, jealousy. Jealousy, okay. Jealousy can be such a thing, and people act like jealousy is only like, you know, mean girls at each other and that kind of thing. It's not. A lot of times when we feel jealousy, it's because we see someone else having and doing something we wish we had, and we wish we had, and we wish we were able to do, okay? And so all that's telling you is there's something right now in your life that you need and want to shift so that you can align with that. It's telling you there's a deep desire for you to have whatever that is, okay? Sometimes people were brought up in situations where the siblings were told to turn against each other, or there was a lot of like sibling jealousy. Oh, that person got this and that person that got that. And so that can set you up for that pattern of like, oh, what about me? Nobody's ever paying attention to me. My daughter loves this, and I do too, actually. I probably would watch it by myself, but it's this cartoon called Phineas and Ferb. And they're 2 genius little boys, and they're completely adorable and hilarious. And then their older sister, who's not quite as genius, is always like, why does nobody think I'm special? You know, it's like this whole thing all the time, right? And that's what I think of, where some of that can come in of like, people aren't paying attention. And maybe that's been a pattern where people aren't paying attention to you or how special you are, right? So yeah, and then I say here, it might even make you sick. Ever heard the term green with envy? Jealousy can really eat at you at that level, okay? So bottling it up is not good. So the thing is what we're doing right here helps with jealousy in general, right? We've learned about our personal power. We've learned how we can use it in positive ways. And so my suggestion is, yes, find positive ways to get the jealousy out of your system. Acknowledge it's because you want something in your life that's different, better, whatever, and then put all your energy into making that happen, okay? That's a great way to deal with jealousy. Here's some exercises if you have some jealousy thing. We talk about this one right here is the piggy bank, where the more we focus on our competitors, the more energy we've given them. Fear, okay, fear is a big one. Okay, I really want to get to forgiveness today. All right, I'm gonna just talk quickly. There's two kinds of fear. There's survival fear. Survival fear is when there is like a legitimate thing happening that you need to be afraid of. Okay, so that is literally for your survival. So it's one of those things. Fear can actually change your entire mind. That's where things like adverse childhood experiences, they now can show that somebody who's had a bunch of like adverse childhood experiences, abuse, traumas, loss of a parent, which is be a situation to be very fearful and horrible and sad, bullying, those kinds of things actually changes your brain chemistry, literally changes your brain chemistry. So that said, so survival fear is the emotional response you feel when you are actually in danger. It's a biological response. It's programmed into your system, and it is really to help you. It's a fight or flight. It's that to help you get out of a situation that's like, oh God, this is going bad, quick. Then we have learned fear, and learned fear ends up being programmed into our systems because of authority figures that have maybe told us to fear things about ourselves. Sort of like if you grew up in certain religious traditions where it's like, oh, there's parts of you that are bad or dirty, and ooh, you have to be afraid, be afraid of that, be afraid, like being afraid of your own body, which is not a great thing. But it can even be like where, don't talk to strangers. I mean, you have to balance that as a parent where you're like, okay, I want her to know not to talk to strangers, but then there's also some people anyways. So it can be, the problem is if you take that in and maybe you had a very anxious parent or parents where everything was about fear. I know there's part of my family where everything is about fear. You'll be like, how's your day today? Well, I don't know. Pretty good, I think. Like they're literally sitting there like, what's good? When's the ceiling gonna fall? Like they can never just say, hey, I'm good, right? And so when you're exposed to that, you're inherently learned that the world is unsafe, that there are things to be afraid of, that doing big things might cause you to have harm. And so then if we think about, well, now I want to manifest my dream life. I want to manifest something amazing in my life. What's the thing that's going to kick in? Your whole system is going to be programmed to like, oh, no, nope, we're not doing that. That is scary and fearful and something bad's going to happen, right? And so the problem is that really causes you to not be able to take these steps that are going to genuinely change your life, okay? So here's the thing, learned fear always limits your life. Learned fear always limits your life. So this is something that if you know that you have some fears that you don't get past, or you were brought up in a very anxious family, take time here. Take time here, because the more that you can logic out, hey, wait a minute, that isn't actually true for me, right? We talked about in station 3, like the I am statements. And if you're like, I am always afraid, then you can't really make those moves. You can't really change your life, because it's like changing your life inherently. You don't 100% know what's next. You know it's going to hopefully be better, should be better, but you don't know completely, which means you're going to have to do some things outside your comfort zone, which means you're going to feel fear. And we can't let that stop us, especially these learned fears. Embarrassment, if you've had an embarrassing or humiliating situation, oh my God, that gets, anybody had a really like humiliating situation, it gets emblazoned into your brain. And this is where when I deal with clients that have been bullied really badly as a child, they are so afraid of anyone actually seeing them or doing anything that could possibly bring humiliation or embarrassment on them, that it's stopping them in their tracks. I had one guy that wanted to go for a promotion, but he was so afraid he was going to say something wrong and everyone's going to laugh at him in this interview. And he was this highly capable, really handsome, lovely man. And he thought something was like inherently wrong with him. He was afraid of that. and it will stop you in your tracks. Okay. So if that is an issue, definitely do let me know, because that can be a really difficult one, and I can definitely help on that. All right. So this is the fear stuff. Man, we have hate. All right. We are going to skip hate for right now. What I will, okay, I'll say this. Hate is not a standalone emotion. It's a reaction to one of the above emotions. Whenever you feel like you hate something, go under it. Is it because you feel sad? Is it because you're jealous? Is it because you're angry at how this person is being? Is it because you're afraid of something? Hate is actually a reaction to wanting to shut the emotion that's actually there underneath it. Stop. Okay. It's a learned emotional response. Sometimes it's just because we don't want to feel whatever we're feeling at that moment in time. And then this is a good one. Since we are all one, when you hate another person, you're really choosing to hate yourself, right? Because whatever we send out, we get back. We're also connected to everything, which doesn't make too much sense. All right. So if you have a lot of hate, and we'll talk about, I'm just going to record guilt because I want to talk about, let's get down to forgiveness. Okay. We're going to do forgiveness really quickly, because then I'm going to have to get ready for my next thing. So, okay. One of the most essential things you can do for a life that actually flows in the way you want it to flow and to be healthier for yourself is to forgive. Unfortunately, forgiving can be one of the biggest and most difficult challenges you're going to ever face, especially if somebody's really hurt you, right? It's very, very, very hard to kind of be like, you know what? I forgive you. Okay. So you are allowed to always express your feelings to get it out, and allow that to be a situation where you're like, okay, I'm expressing this, even if it's not at that person. So one of the things that I have people do is, if you have a hard time right now, if you have someone in your life or things in your life you've had a hard time forgiving, I highly recommend sitting down, writing out a letter to that person or people, and writing exactly how you feel. Really, like literally sitting down and being like, this is what you did. This is how it impacted me. This is how I feel about it. This is how it's impacting me to this day. Here's what I wish would happen to you. Don't edit it. Just get it out of your system. Okay. You're not going to send it to this person. You're not going to give it to this person. So it does not matter what you even say in that moment. The main thing is that you're acknowledging that this is a person who hurt you, and you are still upset, you're angry, you're sad, whatever it is about this, and you're acknowledging it and you're allowing it to get out. I have had so many people I have worked with that have had really bad things happen to them, specifically several that were in different religious institutions, and something bad happened to them. And instead of them being like, oh my God, this happened to you, this is horrible, we're going to deal with this person, yada, yada. Instead, it was put on the individual that was harmed. And then nobody spoke of it again. Nobody talked about it. It was just whatever. And so that person oftentimes even had to go back to church with that individual still being in a position of leadership, for instance. And that can cause a very reasonably big wound. And so not being allowed to ever acknowledge that you were harmed, and acknowledge the harm that happened to you, and acknowledge that you were the victim, you did nothing to deserve this can be a very powerful thing. Okay. So, and I do want to talk about, so a lot of times we can get attached to specific things that have happened along the way. We talk about how the frequencies of your experiences. Now, this is particularly true, I should say, in relationships. So when we talked about like, you'll tune into the same kind of relationship again and again and again. And so maybe you end up retuning into the same abusive guy, or the same alcoholic person, or the same broken winged bird over and over again. And so maybe there's harm that has happened in those relationships. One way to help you to bring some next level awareness is to sort of back away from it and think about the fact that at that moment in time, your mind was programmed to seek that kind of relationship out. Does not mean that person's not responsible for their negative or bad behavior. Just be honest with that. However, because of the unconscious beliefs that you didn't, again, even know were programmed in there, this is not your fault, you suddenly that's the person you were going to find. So even if it wasn't that person in particular, if it wasn't Bob, the toxic boss, it would have been, sue the toxic boss, right? It's the person itself, and this can kind of help if you've had these kinds of like negative experiences over and over again, is to look at the person as a certain energy that you pulled in, and that it wasn't that specific if it wasn't that specific person, it would have been somebody else exactly like it, because unknowingly you were looking for that experience because that's what you thought you deserved. And now you deserve better. Now we know how to reprogram that so we don't have that happen anymore. Okay. So that can sometimes help a little bit if you've had an experience with something that has been, a person, an individual in your life, especially relationships or bosses. This can be, or even friends. This can be, I've had people who come to me and they've had one betrayal after another with friends. Okay. So that's an important aspect of this. The next thing is forgiving. Part of forgiving, and what's really important about this, and I want you to bring your attention to this as you move forward here. Part of forgiving is being willing to release the emotional scars that maybe sometimes you get some power from. So what do I mean by that? Sometimes people, like for instance, so sometimes you can go to, let's say, a Reddit board or whatever of people with like a certain disease, right? And at the bottom, they've created their little mini profile at the bottom of all their little comments, and it'll be like, so-and-so, diagnosed X date, and I have this, and I have this, and I have this, and I have this, and they become a list. They're so attached to that illness that their actual persona, their identity, is this little blurb, right? We can do the same thing with the emotional scars that we have. So we can have a situation where instead of ever moving beyond a really negative experience in our life, we become the victim over and over and over again. We become the person that dealt with this horrible thing, and talking about that horrible thing gives us some power, right? Okay. And so we can become these sort of acronyms of that people describe. Oh, I'm a it'll be some blurb of something. And it's like, what is that? And they're like, oh, it's da 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 da, right? We become that. And I see it online all the time where people are so identified with something horrible that's happened to them that is literally their identity. And we've talked before, if something is your identity, how are you can't get something necessarily better. And we don't necessarily want to have people just feeling bad or sorry, or we don't want to have all these like only getting noticed for these scars, right? And so one of the things you want to take a look at is, are there things, emotional scars, that you are so attached to that they've literally become part of your identity? And if that's the case, how can you redefine yourself that doesn't involve necessarily that emotional scar? Okay. So right here, these are the exercises I wanted to get us to. I'm going to put a practice up in the group today on cutting the cord. This one's so incredibly powerful, you guys, so incredibly powerful. I can't even tell you how powerful this one is. So cutting the cord is literally, you're going to invite it's a practice. You go to a safe space in your mind, and then you start inviting people into your safe space that have harmed you. And it allows you to tell that person whatever you need to tell them. And then you literally cut the cord with that person. You allow them to like fly back away from you. I have seen this work unbelievable wonders. Okay. The next one is this one, using the art of connecting to rewrite the past. Okay. What this does is it's basically turning down the volume of experiences. There can be experiences in our life that we wish turned out different than they did. And if we go back to that experience and we reimagine the ending. So if you can imagine that you're a screenwriter and somebody went, oh, that ending sucks. You got to go back and rewrite that ending. Okay. That's essentially what we're doing here. So you take an experience in your life that maybe was very harmful, that did not turn out well. Maybe it's a situation where something happened to you and let's say your parents didn't stick up for you. And instead you rewrite the ending as if your parents did stick up for you and you see yourself as the victorious person. What this does is it reassociates a more positive set of emotions with this negative experience, and it actually just helps that to shift. It'll help you to not have triggers around those particular things. Okay. And I think I have a practice for that one too. I'll see if I've got that. This one I love. Nobody does this one, and I think it's really important. So this was the one I wanted to make sure we got to today. So these are like your homework things this weekend. Sometimes you really would like to harm the people that have hurt you, right? Sometimes you'd like a little revenge. That's, again, very human emotion. Totally fine, totally understandable even. So a lot of people teach about forgiveness and they're like, oh, you just have to forgive. And oh my God, the people that come to me, they're like, well, what a wonderful teacher that was. And it's like you're supposed to not be upset about it, right? Like, well, and then they keep going back sometimes to these people that are just such a teacher. And it's like, no, that's not a teacher. That's a jerk. Like what you're supposed, there's a lesson there. Yes, I agree. There's a lesson. Get away from the jerk. There's your lesson. That's what he's teaching you. Let's roll, right? And so sometimes we have these situations though, where something happens like this, right? That is, has been such a difficult person. You've been partnered with a narcissistic person. You've worked for a toxic boss, and it's just horrible. It sucked. It has taken things from you. It has taken your energy. It has caused health issues. It is not okay. And sometimes we need a little bit of an energetic beatdown first, where we feel like, okay, I can give this person a little bit of karma, right? So what I suggest that you do, if you feel this towards anything in your life, you basically can either use your imagination, close your eyes and do this, or you can write it out. You can journal it out, okay? What you can do is you literally imagine that person, for me, the way that I do it is I imagine that we're in a movie theater. And that person's up on the stage, okay? And, well, actually, we're at a normal theater. And the person's up on the stage and they're standing there. And it's like, I think to myself, what would I wish would happen to them? And so I see the things that I wish would happen to them. Maybe I'm starting to throw tomatoes at them or something, right? Or, gee, I wish somebody would come up and kick them, or whatever it is. It's okay to actually see that. And something about that can make you feel like, hey, I've given a little bit. It's a healthy, positive, non-hurtful way to allow your body and mind to go, hey, you know what? I could see them getting a little bit of comeuppance here. Okay. So now don't do this all the time. I would pick like one thing to do this to, because you don't want to like continuously tune into it, because it's not up level energy, but it is, you will feel, I promise you will feel so much better. Okay. Now, once you see everything happening to them, see if you can find it in your heart to be like, I'm sending this person unconditional love. Okay. But every time you send them just the teeniest bit of love, you get all that love back to you tenfold. Okay. This is where some of the healing can happen. Now, I'm not asking you again, in any way, shape, or form, to be like, anything that somebody did that was really, really bad, you have to love them. You don't. It's like agape love. It's like the source love, right? It's more, I'm wishing the good for you and then having that good come back to you. So if you do that exercise, I'd love to hear about it, because it really is powerful. I will put the rest of this, and what we'll do, I may have to just record this because I got to roll over for my other thing. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think, okay, on Monday, here's exactly what we're going to do. So Meditation Monday, we're going to do the art of connecting to flow with the positive emotions. We're going to do that as a meditation, and that's going to make sure that I can give you the complete thing for station 4. So that will be Monday. I am going to have to roll over to my 1-minute healing, but I hope this was helpful for you. I will put a couple practices up in the group. It probably realistically will be about an hour and a half before I can get those up and in the group, just because I do have to do my healing thing in like 15 minutes. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that this has helped you kind of see emotions in a little bit different way, and also giving you some tools to be able to find a way of forgiveness that releases the energy of emotional scars and allows you to honestly be free of that, so that you can start to create the life that you truly desire. Again, station 4 tends to be such an important one. So if it did come up in your flow factor results, it's a good one to read through and do those exercises. All right, I will see. I think some of you guys are going to be on the call in a minute, so I'll see some of you then. Until then, have a beautiful weekend. I will put the exercises up in a little bit, and I'll see you guys really soon. Have a beautiful weekend. Sending love out to all of you.